Well, good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for coming tonight to New Tracks Meetup. Really do appreciate it. Hope you come back often and hope you tell your friends to join us. TC has some announcements that he'd like to make about security for our Zoom meetings and also the help situation that we need. TC?
Hello there, everyone. We've done things a little differently for this meeting. We've done it in such a way that people can't share unless we make them a co-host. Now, that doesn't make you the host. You don't have to worry about all that. That's still Ed's problem. Or fun, we don't know. So it's just very important, two things. You have to unmute yourself when it's time for you to talk. And then you have to mute yourself back because we'd really like everybody to stay muted. Then that also goes for everybody else. Stay muted. And if you have something to say, there is a raise hand. If you are looking, if you're on a computer at least, you can raise your hand under reactions. And we can say, yeah, what? And then on the second subject is we could really use some assistance. We don't have any backup on any of our positions right now. We need another person anyway to monitor the YouTube channel on Wednesday nights. And Ed needs a backup. And Darren, who's doing our videos, chopping things up so that we can edit them on YouTube. Thank you, Darren. He needs backup. So we really need a couple of extra people and probably more. You don't have to do it every day, every week, but we need some backup, please. And that's the main thing I've got to say, Jim.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much, TC. Listen, I understand about wanting everybody to be muted because we've had problems in the past. But, you know, at the same time, we're all adults here. We all know each other. But most of you have been here and are not new to the shows. So, you know, if you want to say something, I don't care if you raise your hand first. You know, we haven't had a problem with that in the past. I'm not too concerned about that standpoint. I am concerned about people bombing us and so forth and interrupting the show, but I don't really care who talks when and so forth. We've got a new website that's being developed by Dan Darby for us, and it'll be ready on the 15th of March. Please don't go to it before the 15th of March because it won't be there yet. On the 15th of March, even though you have registered in the past, please go to the new website, newtracksmodeling.com, and re-register in order to assure that you're going to get the emails about how to log in on the Zoom. Otherwise,
we may be able to capture everybody, but it's that we're going to miss a few people. So if you don't get the welcome message, double check your spam filter, but otherwise, yes, you'll need to re-register.
Okay. Well, I've lost where I was going here. Okay, the new site's going to start on the 15th of March. And I think it's really going to be it's going to be helpful to us. It's going to have some additional information that we haven't had in the past, and I'm really looking forward to what Dan has put together for him. You know, this is his profession. This is his business. He does this for a living, so I think this is really going to be something special that we can count on. Our next My Bill, that's going to be a whole show again, is scheduled for May the 29th. It's the first date that we have open for another one. If another date comes open because somebody has to cancel or something, then we will have one sooner. But right now, May the 29th is the next one. That'll be a full show. What I'm thinking of doing is starting to limit the time that each modeler can come onto the My Bill part to 5 minutes. The reason for that is I'd rather see if the models really take a lot of time to explain, I'd much rather see that become a major part of the show rather than trying to squeeze it into the My Bill section. And then other people not participate in the My Bill because it's running too long. The last My Bill that we had, we didn't, the show wasn't over until after 10 o'clock. And that's what I'm trying to get a handle on. So if we limit everybody to 5 minutes, then it's kind of, this is where I am with the model. This is the kind of help I need. If you got any ideas, this is my model, take a look at it, blah, blah, blah. But if it's much more than that, then we'd like to do it in a separate segment somehow. I'll give you an example. Tonight, Paul Vaughn is developing some new 3D models. TC, I think you have the videos of them. And Paul, if you might want to talk about them briefly, this is the kind of My Bill segment that I'm thinking about doing every show for a while. Maybe have 3 or 4 modelers a show, be able to show something that they're working on. So Paul, if you'd like to take a few minutes.
Well, TC, you need to put up this is a model, a 3D printed model of a Tacoma rail shorty flat car. It is a real prototype to do the model. Next. This is a flat car load I downloaded from somebody and I 3D printed it. It's for ON30. Go ahead, TC. These are 3 dumpsters. This is O scale, S, and HO scale dumpsters, 3D printed. They was also downloaded off the internet as a STL file. So that's what I've been doing. Any questions? You back?
Are the dumpsters for sale individually, Paul?
Oh, I haven't even thought about that. It's just something I just downloaded. I thought you guys would enjoy them. I don't know yet whether I'll sell them or not.
Anybody have any questions for Paul?
Questions?
Paul, where did you download those STL files? Are they just like for general information, or did you purchase them, or could you maybe put something in the chat about where you got them?
I don't even remember where I got them. Things of burst or something like that.
That's what you've been using, isn't it?
I didn't hear that.
Haven't you been using Thingiverse to get most of that stuff?
I think so. They're STL files. As far as I'm concerned, they're open source for anybody to download to use them.
Excuse me, what did you say the source was?
I'm looking it up right now.
I believe it's Thingiverse or something like that.
Called Thingiverse, Thingiverse, Thingiverse. And it's basically a place you can put lots of files. So I did a wood scribing tool that uses multi-X-Acto knives and holds them so you can do wood grain scribing, and it's up there. It's a place.
There's the link in the chat. Oh, Thingiverse is all kinds of 3D printer files. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Paul, thanks so very much. I appreciate you telling us about that.
You're welcome.
We had Stan Cedarleaf on not too long ago. And up until I met Stan, I had never had a logo for my railroad. My railroad's freelance, JNNPRR. So I was playing around with some stuff. And Ed, if you'll put up the email for me. This is my new logo. Somebody from another modeler suggested the JNNP be done that way, which I thought was kind of deep. The bell, I'm a trolley modeler, so that kind of fits my time frame. And Stan has been just wonderful to work with. So Stan is developing my new train logo, and I'll have to show it to you. It's going to be black, and the bell is going to be gold. So I'm really happy about the way that this is coming out for Stan. And Stan did a much better drawing than the one that I did and sent to him. So with that said, and the next My Bill for the total show being on May 29th, and I hope that you'll share with us what you're working on and what you're doing for your modeling at that time. And before that, if you have something that can be short and sweet, like Paul did tonight, then I'd like to be able to do some of those each one of the shows if we can. So with that said, I'd like to turn to Paul Thompson for the quick tip of the evening. Paul?
Right. Thank you, Jim. What have I got in front of me here? Okay, now what I'll do is I'll put up a share screen. Okay. I have okay. What you're seeing and what I hope you're seeing is a truck, which is what I wanted to just sort of point out tonight. I found a really neat source for a few trucks in HO. They're quite detailed. They run beautifully. And the website is really sort of well detailed in a number of railroads that use certain trucks and this kind of thing. What it is Tahoe models. Their trucks, I use the 088, but they do come in standard 110 for HO. And they're reasonably priced, but they are really nice models. And as you can see, there's older and there is newer. And on the back of the trucks, I hope you're all seeing this, is a basic description of what it is and when it was used. And their website goes on to list various railroads, and one of them was a truck that was specific to CP on their mini boxes, the Bellman truck, and they had that. So if you're looking for any oddball stuff, this might be a place you could get it. And it's TahoeModels.com. And of course, just a reminder for everybody, when you get any truck or you get anything, check it out with your NMRI gauge. That's my tip for the night, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. Really appreciate it. Next, I'd like to turn to Greg Cassidy and Chris Corse to do their build-along segment of Chris's corner window model. Greg?
Thank you, Jim. Let me get my share screen up and get it started. And let me try and get through without making many mistakes. Welcome to New Tracks Build Along. I'm Greg Cassidy. This is a collaborative build of Conowingo Models Gray Street House, the company house version in HO scale. Tonight is going to be part 3. We'll be painting the walls, trim, the windows and doors, and the roof. Our previous editions, we covered the supplies and tools needed and bracing the walls and building the foundation. If you need to, you can go back and look at those. I'll be covering techniques that any modeler probably knows. This is what I'm doing with this kit. I have a surprise. We have 3 kits, which means we'll have 3 houses for me to show you techniques on. 3 houses and 3 techniques. They'll be listed as house 1, house 2, and house 3. Through a trick of fate, I had 3 houses to work on, and I figured this will be the best way to show a variety of techniques. You can also paint your house if you want to without it looking weathered and worn. So I'll usually start off with doing some planning and testing. The carrier sheets that the walls come in are great for those because they're the same material you're going to be working on. In this case, I was trying a couple of stains from Best and from Hunterline. I decided to go with one of the stains from Hunterline. And I was trying one thing over it, which is using some whiteout correction tape. It's an interesting effect, and I'm going to play with it more. I won't be using it during tonight's build, but don't be afraid to experiment with things and see how they come out. So we'll start with house 1. I'll have the house numbers in the lower left corner. For house 1, we're going to use a technique that's dry brushing over a stain. I always take photos as I go along to judge how they come out. The camera can see a lot that the naked eye doesn't. The first step is to stain the walls. This is after they've been braced. Now, if you want an unpainted look, you could stop right now. After the stains dry, we'll be dry brushing the walls. The dry brushing technique is basically to unload most of the paint off your brush so you just have a very little on and then go over it lightly. You're putting a very small amount of paint down. This is the effect that we end up with. After you're done with that, you'll want to set them aside to dry. I'll usually take photos, including the materials that I used for such as the stain and the paint, so that I know what I used on what kits. Something that I do want to show, and this is a technique that you can play with, and you can do it before or after you paint the walls. In this case, it was after I painted the walls. Try lifting a few boards as if the wood was starting to curl and come off. You can use either a razor blade or a little X-Acto knife for doing this. For house 2, we're going to try a technique that's stain over spray paint. These are the braced walls in my spray booth. And for them, I put a light spray with a gray base coat. I didn't want the paint to be too heavy because in the next step, we're going to distress the wood. This is brushing the paint off some using either a saw or a wire brush. You don't want to take it all off, but you want to take some of it off. This is the sort of effect that you're looking for. If you're doing these techniques, you do want to watch out. You can get some little fuzzies that you'll want to try to pull off. After you've distressed the paint, then you're going to be ready to stain. In this case, I decided to use Hunterline Greige. You'll apply the wash of a stain over the walls, and I tend to make it heavier towards the bottom of the walls. That's where the walls are more exposed and where they'll weather more. This is the effect you get after you've painted, distressed the wood some, and then put stain over it. So for house 3, this is a little more involved technique. It's where we're going to sponge over the paint and the stain. There are a lot of YouTube videos showing how to do sponging on different models. The first thing we'll do is paint the walls. I used an airbrush using Vallejo paint, but you can brush the paint on as well. I did a little bit of testing to see what stain I wanted to put over the paint. It's hard to see, but I wrote down which stains I used, and then I tried a couple of different colors for sponging on. Once I decided what I was going to do, I ended up using Hunterline Driftwood stain. And this is the wall with the paint and stain on it, and I'm going to start sponging paint on the wall. I use a grout sponge for this. It's kind of a closed cell sponge. There's a lot of sponges out there. This is what I like to work with. The trick in sponging is to put some paint on your sponge and then get most of it off so that once you're dabbing it on the walls, you're just getting small bits of it on the wall. It's something you may want to play with before you start working on your model with it. This is the effect that you get after you sponge over the paint and the stain. And again, it gives kind of a worn paint look. So those are the three techniques I used on the houses. Next, we'll be painting the strip wood. The first thing I do is get them ready by running them through a little sandpaper. It takes off any little bits of wood that's left on them. For house one, we did the same technique we did for the walls, and that's where we stain the wood and then dry brush over it. For house two, the same technique where I painted it and then distressed the wood a little bit and then put stain over that. And for house three, it was the same technique where I painted and then stained the walls and then used a sponge to go over that. Sponging over pieces of wood that small is a little trickier. You don't want to get too much paint on it, which is easy to do. This is how they come out looking after you've sponged them. The next thing we move on to is windows. Prepping the windows for painting, the first thing I did with this kit, I noticed that the tissue windows that came were two different sizes. And I didn't like that the smaller ones had a bit of a windowsill that the larger ones didn't. So I cut that off. That's not necessary for this kit, but it's just something that I did so they matched up. Then when prepping the walls before priming them, I usually cut off part of the sprue. I still want something to hold them by, but by doing this, I can smooth off where I cut the sprue off. And then after it's primed and painted, I only have to touch up where I cut off where it was still attached. You can cut them all the way off and clean up all the edges and then hold them down with tape as well. If I don't have a handle on something that I'm going to paint, this particular door doesn't come attached to a sprue, I'll temporarily glue something on so I have a handle to hold it with. Then again, I started going through 3 different techniques so that my windows would match the houses. For house 1, I used a Crackle Medium. You can get this at Michael's or a number of online places. You put it on before you put the paint on, and then you can paint over the Crackle Medium. I used an airbrush, but you can brush it on as well. What the Crackle Medium does is allow you to chip off the paint after the paint has dried. If you take some type of soft brush or a toothpick, then where the paint's over the Crackle Medium, you can scrape it a little bit and it gives a bit of a worn effect, which is harder to achieve over plastics and wood. For house 2, I did the same prep, but I wanted a darker color to these windows. I was looking for a dark wood effect, so I used a dark primer. The next thing I did with them is I used some artist pigments. These are dry pigments that you can put on either wet or dry. I brushed them on damp. You can get these pigments from companies such as Gamblin, AK, Earth Pigments, or Bragdon. This is the effect that I had after I put on the dark pigments. For house 3, I wanted a little bit of color in these windows, so I used a light gray primer. Then I went with a turquoise paint, but I wanted it to be very light, as if it had mostly worn off. So again, I used the sponge technique to put it on. And then after it was on, I used some more artist pigments, this time a light gray, and I brushed them on dry. And they just toned down the color of the turquoise. The next thing we're going to work on was painting the roofs. These are the undersides of the roofs. They'll always show over the edge of the model, so I always will paint them. You can paint them the house or a trim color or just some dark color. They don't stand out, but you don't want the cardboard showing. You don't need to paint the tops of the roofs. They'll be covered with roofing paper or shingles. So the rolled roofing paper that comes with this kit is a sheet of black construction paper. The technique I use for these is first I put down a light coat of gray on it, And then after that, I'll put down a light coat of some matte color, usually a dark black or a very dark gray. The next step in preparing the roofing paper is to cut it into strips. They can be between 1 and 2 foot wide. And then the technique that I use to get them to start looking like worn rolled roofing is you put it on a block where you can hang the edge over, and then use some sandpaper such as 150 grit to just sand the very edge. You're trying to get some of the black off and down to the gray. It's very easy to do. And again, there's this technique shown on a number of YouTube videos. Now, all of the techniques that we've talked about tonight will equally work on the O-scale model if you've ended up with that. When we get into some of the other techniques, there will be a difference, but tonight's techniques will work just fine for either scale. Next week, we'll be starting the construction. We'll be putting the windows and doors in and starting to put the walls together and finish up on the porch. That's tonight's build along, if anybody has any questions.
Greg, did
Do
you
you
talk to?
do both sides of your walls?
I did not. I braced my walls so that I don't have to. Now, if you were going to detail the interior or if you're going to light the interior, then you'll want to consider painting the inside of the walls, either a dark color if you're going to light them, or you may have to hide some of the bracing and paint them an interior color if you want to do an interior to the model.
Greg, those were excellent photographs of the close-ups of the siding as you were weathering it. What kind of a camera do you use?
It's just my little Android phone.
Excellent photographs. Very
Well,
detailed close-ups.
thank you. Like I say, I usually will take the photograph to see how the effect that I'm doing comes out, because especially while we're in lockdown, most of our models get seen in photographs. And I ran into one roofing situation on one of these where I was using a roofing that came out looking great in person, and every photograph I took of it, because of the way the light was reflecting, looked horrible. And I spent more time trying to get that so it would photograph right than I did building the whole roof. But I did it.
Greg, how do you brace the inside? Do you brace vertically, horizontally? How do you brace?
If you're using clapboard or something like that, I'll brace vertically. If you're using board and batten, you'll want to brace horizontally. And then other than that, it's just glue it on really strong. I see I had a couple questions down here. Let me see. I have not tried egg paint for peeling. I have used a couple different Crackle mediums. And I didn't stain both sides. I only stained one side of it. For Hunterline, yeah, they do advertise drying time. I'll usually let it sit longer than that, but I have a hair dryer next to my workbench. If I'm in a hurry, I'll use that either on a stain or on a paint.
That's why you look. That's why you look so good every night, huh?
I'll be getting my second shot in a week, and then I will get all my COVID hair cut off.
Have you ever used a sheet of plastic, thin plastic or something like that instead of individual bracing? Just cover the whole back?
No, I haven't. There are a couple of kits available, and in fact, Chris makes a couple of them where you actually have an internal structure and the outside cladding is attached to that. And in those cases, you don't really need to worry about any type of bracing or anything. But I've just always used strip wood for the bracing where I had to use it. For the couple of kits where I've put interiors in them, it takes a little more thought because you have to try and make it look scale and try and put it where it might be hidden in between walls and stuff like that.
Greg, thank you so much. Really do appreciate it. You too, Chris. Beautiful kit.
It's my pleasure. And I don't know if Chris wants to say anything about the kits. He's the one who designed them.
Yeah, like I've said before, is these kits are incredibly versatile. Something about this kit, and I mean, just really walk around in everyday life, and you can see 10 of them, and no two of them look the same. So, they are what you make of them, and there's still plenty in stock. So, if anybody's interested, ConnellWingoModels.com. And Greg, you did a fascinating job, and like we talked about on the email, that one photo with all three of them where you see it start to come together, it's like, ooh, now I'm interested. Now this is cool. So thanks for doing all that, Greg. That's huge.
Well, thanks to both of you. I really do appreciate your interest and participation. Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to turn to Martin Brecker, MMR, for a lesson on scratch building. So Martin, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Okay, let's see if I can get my screen to share properly today. And come on, there we go. Is that working for everybody? We're all good, okay.
Yes. Yes.
And we don't even have an error message this week, even better. I have no idea why that was there last time, but it isn't this time. This is what comes from having a custom built computer that your son builds for you. Some days it has a mind of its own. So the basic cabin or company house number 2. We're going to do 2 and 3 tonight because there's a short set of slides for both. So we'll get through these basically a box construction. And there's what we're starting with. I'm not going to start with the wood or anything. This is my scrap box rating. A T-sheet door and a frame, a Grant Line window. I got a Ziploc bag of the daggone things. Somebody painted them, didn't use them. I bought them cheap. And a smoke jack. I think, not sure where that comes from. Well, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it might be the last one or next to the last one of those I had in the box. Turner Model Works. That's where it came from. Long time ago. So, okay, so this is basically an extrapolation of last week's little box house. So there's the door, there's the window. You can move the window around, you could put it on the sides, you could put it over here. I don't know, putting it in the back seems a little weird. The difference between this house and the one I showed last week, we're going to put a little addition off to the side. Just need to put the corner posts over here to mount the side addition. Pretty simple. This is just scrap clapboard. This, you can see it's scrap because I've glued up 2 pieces right here. And this has got a line on it from something that I didn't use. So once it's painted, it won't matter. Just put it together on the corners, get it relatively square as best you can. Measure corner to opposite corner if you're really compulsive about it. I eyeball it more often than not. Bracing at the top around the base for a base. If I was going to attach it to something, this is for the roof, mounting the roof. Same story here on the side pieces. These corners are put together all with goo on the end grain and CA on the, side grain on the corner posts. You have about 15 seconds to get it aligned properly when you assemble using that mixture. And you'll need a scalpel or a chainsaw to get it apart later. So if you drop it, and I've been known to drop models in my own shop onto the concrete floor, they just bounce. Of course, it's O-scale, so they're pretty sturdy. For some reason, I put on a board-by-board roof on this building. I have no idea why, other than I felt like doing it. Just to do something different. So you just grab a bundle of strip wood. That's probably HO, I'm going to say 4x20 or something like that. I've got a big pile of HO strip wood that I've been slowly trying to get rid of. And I find the fastest way to get rid of it is to just build something out of it and incorporate it into something where no one will really notice it. It works just fine. Nobody's actually coming out with calipers and measuring my strip wood in my buildings very often. We'll fast forward right to the very end. And I'm glad that Greg talked about finishing, because I wanted to show something a little different on the outside of this. This is something I stumbled across 15 years ago. And this is a variation of it. And I used it on the pickle plant that's on my layout, which is a huge structure, and was about 30 pages published by the time it got into print. But what this is, that kind of yellowish color underneath there, what way this works is you put a coat of Floquil Wisconsin Central Gold on a side. I only do one side at a time. And Wisconsin Central Gold from Floquil is a gloss paint. It's one of the few Floquil paints that's a gloss. They made about 6 or 7 or 8. I don't know what number it is. And I mistakenly used this for a structure once, and my wife came down, looked at it, gave a slight scream of outrage and said, "You can't be serious. Nobody in their right mind would paint something that color." And I said, "Okay, well, let me quick throw some of the mineral red on top of it." And the mineral red I had was polyscale. And the Wisconsin Gold wasn't dry yet. It was tacky. And I slapped it on, covered it all up, and went upstairs and had a cup of tea or two, and came back down an hour later. And this is the kind of finish the entire structure broke out into. So I haven't tried every gloss paint under the sun to see what kind of other effects you can get with this, but it seems to work fairly well for this one. And you can see you can tailor it a little bit by how much Wisconsin Gold you put on each side. You can lighten it a little bit or put it a little heavier or let it dry a little longer. But it's certainly a paint-paint interaction that's making things interesting. And of course, the old drill a hole in the side with the hand drill, and I do use a hand drill. I don't know what size it is, and that's just a washer out of my 632 machine screws drawer. This is tar paper, printed tar paper from Paper Creek Models. I had some of that left over from a kit that I developed a long time ago. And I think it looks pretty fair. You cut it out relatively carefully with a scalpel on a piece of cardboard. There's 3 or 4 layers here. And you just glue it down with some carpenter's glue, a little bit at a time. And what's nice about this also is underneath of these individual boards, this is not clean and flat and perfectly smooth. It's got a lot of ripple in it that you're not necessarily seeing in the photo, but it's got some ups and downs and all over the place, which is not unlike what you see in a real building. And there's another view from the other side with a little shed. There must have been a lot of weather on this side. This must be the north side. But it came out a little heavier crackled than I thought it would. But I never know exactly what I'm going to get until I come back after I've had a cup of tea. So that's a technique you can use. I suppose you can probably adapt that to a gloss under and a gloss oil solvent-based paint undercoat with a water-based top coat. At one time, the other trick that I would use with this, the first thing I would put down on was to seal the entire surface with a coat of Minwax. I didn't care what color it was because I was going to paint over it anyhow, but it was to seal the wood to really force this solvent in the yellow paint to stay at the top and not soak into the wood. So it would interact even more aggressively with the polyscale. So, third house. Gosh, look at that. It's the same smoke jack, the same door. Oh, I got 2 windows. I must have I was getting desperate. I got to get rid of another window. Two windows in one building. It's a little bit bigger building. It's going to have a little bit of a porch. So that's what this cutaway here is, and this extra board or two here, we're going to have a little bit of a front porch. And we put it together, basically the same thing as before. Turn the roofing angles around a different direction, and the same bracing, hold the roof on, whatever, the same with the same clapboard, holding it all together with these corner boards that are just goo and CA, holds it all together nicely and stiffly. You have to just have to be able to be careful on measuring, making sure this adds up with this little bit of overlapping here. And this got a floor with a pair of ridge poles just to nail the roof down to. Didn't want to get too complicated because we're not going to take the roof off later anyhow. No one's going to see what it looks like from the inside unless you've got some way of drilling a hole and getting a micro camera inside from the floor. It's a little too inventive for me. And just putting it together, you can see from another angle. I actually went back and put a little bit of scribe siding on the inside, just in case someone just does look up inside. Gotta have that covered. I don't know if I worry too much about porch roofs and things like that, because once it's on your layout, unless your track is really high, your layout height is really high, nobody's going to see underneath the roof. I mean, unless they're children and looking up. But most adults, you're going to get down on your hands and knees by the side of somebody's layout and look up at the roof of the buildings. And if it's 5 feet or 2 feet back off the edge, they can't see it anyhow. So it's really not that important. Now, if you're making a contest model, that's another story. Then I wouldn't even be using clapboard. I'd be doing board by board, make your own clapboard. And that's so much fun. Not. And okay, so a corner post, we painted all. I have no idea what color green that was. I think that was the bottle of green that I finished up today. Painting my O-scale version of the gray house trim. And I killed the bottle of paint so I can celebrate. One more bottle of polyscale gone. This is just builders in scale tar paper. Just apply it a layer at a time. Carpenter's glue. It's over 1/32 basswood sheet. And just bend down the corners over the edges. I have no idea what the rest of these colors are, but they're all polyscale because unless it's warm enough, take something outside and paint it. I don't use a solvent-based paint indoors, or I get yelled at a lot. Today was up to 70 degrees. I was out in the driveway painting. I'll be there tomorrow. It's supposed to get to 75. And you turn around, I put some floor joists underneath the floor. Gave them a coat of paint. That's some gray of some sort. I have no idea what it is. But to wrap it around, it's pretty much a box with an indentation in it with a door and 2 windows. And there's the roof again. You do want to put this cap off the ridge with some tar paper. Otherwise, it's going to rain inside. Don't ask me how I know. And we'll stop there. We've zipped right along. That's as far enough as we need to go. And I'm done. So I can unshare unless somebody really wants me to go back and look at a slide.
Martin, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
The drying time, does it work with coffee instead of tea?
Depends how fast you make coffee. Cup of tea is 1.5 minutes in the microwave. A couple of scoops of sugar, a dash of margarita mix to get the lime juice in, and more sugar. 5 minutes. You know, I'm not in that much of a hurry though. I don't run around fast. Actually, I'll probably have 5 other models going anyhow on the bench. So, while the glue's drying, while the paint's drying, while something's going on, I'm not standing there watching it. It's not very entertaining. I'm usually somewhere else in the shop doing a different model. And I'll stop sharing. No questions? No inquisition?
The
we got-
tar paper that you used on the roof.
Yeah.
where it was from another manufacturer. You managed to get a really good worn edge on that without it looking like it was torn by full-size fingers.
Yeah, that's the number 11 scalpel. Yeah, very carefully go around the, it prints like that. It's actually printed out like that. And you just go around the edge with a scalpel real slow. I like to cut that out with the paper on top of a piece of cardboard. So you can feel it going through the paper into the cardboard as opposed to on something hard like a piece of wood. Then you can't feel the blade actually penetrating. So you know you've cut through it because you don't want to have to separate it and tear it later. You get a little nub and then that's white and it doesn't look right.
Well, that looked beautiful.
Anything else? Those are simple things, you know. So I think next week I'm not going to do a structure. I'll skip a week on structures and I'll go back to some freight cars. Because the next structure, I think the next structure I have would be a little bit larger. But it's time to move up to a bigger box with a roof on it.
Thanks so much, Martin. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Glad to do it.
Next, I'd like to turn to Big Bill Neal, MMR, for some comments on these track designs. Bill?
How much time you got, Jim? I can kind of eat about 15 minutes up if we can do it.
Yep.
All right. By the way, Martin, that was a nice presentation. Thank you. Let me get my video sharing going here, and we'll see how this works here.
Don't give him a big head now. He's going to ask for more money.
I know, it's tough. Yeah. Let's see. Share screen. There we go. And we're going to share this guy right here. Make this full screen. And I'm going to go into my slideshow. Here we go. Thought I'd talk about grades tonight. See how that was playing with people. I know most folks find grades a little challenging, so we'll play around with a little bit, and talk about some mathematics on it. First of all, let's talk about grade calculations. A lot of you guys probably have a good idea what this stuff is, but you'll see grades expressed as a 1-in calculation sometimes for prototype grades. So if you took a 2% grade, that's really a 2-inch rise and a 100-inch run. Now, people in the prototype world will talk about that as a 1 in 50 grade. You'll also see stuff like, a 1 in 75 grade or something like that. You have to convert that, if you will, into a percentage to kind of take that into model form. Like a 3% grade is a 1 in 33. That's a pretty doggone steep grade for most prototypes. But that's kind of how grades are calculated, just to make sure people understand. Now, these are normal, what I would consider normal heavy grades on the prototype. The Pensy ran about 1.9, 1.87 across horseshoe curve. Would have been about a 3% if they hadn't built the horseshoe curve and wrapped it down around that valley. Sandpatch hit about 2% coming up the hill. That made those 210-2s really work hard. Getting through the Cascade Tunnel, that Great Northern hit about 2.2. And that's about the same as the Tehachapi Loop on the Southern Pacific, getting through the Cascades. Pretty steep grades, but there were worse. The Madison Incline, of course, is the steepest mainline grade. And that was the son of a gun. You can kind of get some ideas here. Madison Incline was a 1 in 17, or about almost 6% grade. And that was the steepest mainline grade. The Cass Scenic Railway goes up a 1 in 9 grade, which is about 11%. That's pretty steep. And then you have about a 4% grade on the Saluda, North Carolina grade. This was a pretty tough grade as well, too. But that's all fine and good, but how does this affect model stuff? I'm going to talk a little bit about that. You can see that grades really were challenging, even a 1% grade, caused railroads a lot of trouble. Penn Pilot, that's a website. They have a bunch of these photographs taken in 1939 across the state of Pennsylvania. If you haven't explored Penn Pilot, do a Google on it and take a look at it. They had some poor airplane guy and a photographer out photographing all of the agricultural land for an agricultural study. And a lot of these photographs are available through Penn State and something called Penn Pilot. And of course, as they were photographing the agricultural lands, they caught all kinds of railroads running. You can see pictures of East Broad Top in operation, the Penn City, you know, anybody that crossed Pennsylvania, you can take a good look at. This is a shot of the area that I model. It's the Panhandle on the Pennsylvania. You can see here that there's a modest length train of maybe 70 cars, maybe 60 cars, and there's a locomotive at the front and there's a locomotive at the back pushing. So it was a significant grade for people. I thought this was a neat picture. You can see the engines there. I got them circled in red now.
Excuse me, Bill.
Yeah.
I just went to look up Penn Pilot.
Yeah.
And they've taken it down.
Mm.
They do give an alternative though.
Do they?
Yeah.
All right, I'll have to take a look at that before I talk anything more about it. I captured these pictures back when they were running it, and that's too bad because I had this image of this old biplane flying over Pennsylvania with a guy leaning over the edge of the airplane with a camera, you know, one of the glass slide cameras, taking pictures, trying to hold the camera on as they're running along at about 75 miles an hour up in the air. And they're amazing shots. That's too bad. I will have to go research that and find out where the alternative is. But thanks for pointing that out to me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm going to put it in the Zoom or in the chat.
Okay. So we started talking about prototype tractive efforts. You can see that an F7 put out about 40,000 pounds, a GP9 about 44,000, GP38 was maybe 54,000. Steam engines generally had a higher tractive effort, but then again, they were running by themselves. You put two diesels together, you can easily meet 2 or 3 diesels easily exceeds a 210.2 or 280, a 210, excuse me. And the Penske, you know, all these things are give you just a rough idea of what they can pull. Means very little to us from a model standpoint, though. Model trains have considerably less pull, of course. I don't care if you want to talk about traction tires or adding weight or additional axles in a 6-axle engine versus a 4-axle engine or lower gearing. Just forget about all that stuff. Just measure the tractive effort coming out the back end of the engine, and you get numbers like this. They vary anywhere from 3 ounces, maybe 2.6 ounces, all the way up to 4 ounces in HO, 5 ounces in HO. End scale, end scale is considerably smaller, of course. I'm going to probably work on the HO stuff most in this presentation because I'm most familiar with it, first of all, and secondly, it's most popular. But I think anybody modeling N scale or any of the other scales can probably extrapolate some of the ideas. But you'll see that a lot of these numbers really vary. They really average out about 3 to 3.5 ounces per engine if you really get down to it. And that's a pretty good number to work with. There are tools available. Micromart used to offer this thing right here, which would measure in digital down to 1/10 of an ounce what the pull was. I just looked this guy up. It's a little bit larger item. It was, I think, about $9 or $10, and it will measure down to hundredths of an ounce. So you can play with that a little bit. These guys are pretty easy to get a hold of, and you can measure tractive effort on your engines. And when you start planning your grades, you don't want to use the most powerful engine you've got to do your planning. You want to use the average engine, the engine you're probably most likely going to run in front of the local, because you don't want to double head or push on a local. That's got to be able to run all over your railroads. So you need to measure that engine and figure out how much pulling power it has. So when you begin to do these calculations, you get an idea what you're doing. Now, I'm going to talk about the grade profile of my railroad and show you how I did the calculation. And just as in general, a good way to kind of think about this stuff. Now I'm going to do something called hand grenade math. It's close enough to do the job. It's not perfect. Okay. So bear with me on this stuff. Now, if you see my railroad, there's a level area. There's about 4 foot of a 1% grade going up to the Ohio River Bridge, and then coming back down. And again, we're back on level. And then there's a long 2% grade going almost 2 scale miles up to Burgettstown. And these kinds of grades have a different effect on the train, and I'm going to show you how that works. I'm going to use a typical engine that has about 3 to 3.5 ounces of tractive effort. Now, Model Railroader says an ounce of tractive effort will pull 14 cars. I think that's a little conservative. I think it's closer to 15. So I'm going to talk about that kind of a number. Now, I know we don't all run 30-car trains, but you can take a look at the mathematics here and understand how this works and do your calculations based. I mean, if you run a 12-car train or a 20-car train or whatever it is, you can use this math for it. If I take a typical 30-car train, the rolling resistance of this train will be about 2 ounces. In other words, the engine's got to produce about 2 ounces of tractive effort to move this on level ground. If you take a typical engine producing about 3 to 3.5 ounces, no problem. Okay, so let's put him on a grade here. Now, coming up on, this is the Ohio River Bridge on my railroad. And coming up to it, we've got this 1% grade, but it's only 4 foot long. Now, running 40-foot boxcars in HO scale, they take about 6 inches each. So 8 cars are on this grade. So 8 cars produce a bit of a force backwards. And these cars weigh about 4 ounces each. So if you take a look at the calculation, you can say, gee, I've got 8 cars on this little 1% grade. Each of those 8 cars weighs 4 ounces. So 1% of 32 ounces, that's the total, is about 1/3 of an ounce pulling back against the locomotive. So now we've taken the 2 ounces of rolling resistance, and we're going to add 1/3 of an ounce of resistance going up the hill. My typical engine, when pulling at 3 ounces, can pull a train up onto the bridge with no problem. And that's exactly what I wanted. So you can pull up onto the bridge. It's great. Now, let's go up onto the ruling grade, and they call it a ruling grade usually because the entire train gets on the grade. In this case, we've got all our 30 cars up here, and the 30 cars will, if you take the 30 cars weighing 4 ounces each, that's 120 ounces of train times the grade, which is 2%. We now have 2.4 ounces pulling backward, trying to come back down the grade on this train. So we have the rolling resistance of the 30 cars, which is 2 ounces. We've got 2.4 ounces new pressure pulling us back down the grade. And of course, the locomotive has to lift itself up the grade. So we've lost maybe 1/2 ounce of tractive effort when we put on the grade. Now, again, this is hand grenade math. I majored in physics, so I have a pretty good idea that this is not perfect, but it's close. So this whole deal, all this total is a backwards pull, I should say, of about 4.9 ounces. In other words, you got 4.9 ounces of resistance. This poor locomotive is not going to be able to pull the grade with 30 cars. You can use that as a good calculation. So what do? Well, you put a locomotive on the back. Now you add a second 3 ounces of push. The second engine has to lift itself. So there's a little bit of 1/2 ounce of that locomotive being pulled backwards, or you lose that tractive effort. But together, these two engines will produce about 5 ounces of tractive effort, which exceeds the 4.9 ounces of backward pull. In other words, it can push the train up the hill, just barely. Either of these locomotives fails, the other locomotive will simply stall on the hill. It will not stringline the train or bunch the train if you operate this way. And it's a neat operation. Here's a picture of the grade on my railroad. Of course, Craig Wilson added some smoke for me. I really like this picture. I've got a 482 coming up the hill on the number 4 track, and probably a 282 coming up on the number 2 track. And behind those guys is a pusher. In some cases, 2 pushers, usually a 210-0. Here's a pair of pushers working a coal train. This happened to be like a 50-car train. It required a couple of pushers working upward. So you get an idea how the grades can be a huge operational challenge, and they can be a lot of fun to work with, particularly with DCC and independent control. You have somebody working to help our engines, and they can have a grand time. Most of the guys coming down in my basement are yelling, "Helper, helper, I got the helper job," and there's usually an argument and an arm wrestling operation before somebody solves who gets that job, because it's a lot of fun. So Now, of course, pasture trains didn't get pushed. That was absolutely verboten. They usually had 2 or 3 engines on the front. In this case, the mail train coming up the hill here has a pair of locomotives on the front. Okay, that's it. Jim, that's all I got on grades.
Oh, I think that's fascinating. I learned a lot from it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You have a question in the chat.
Okay, I couldn't see the chat. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it says, does it make a difference between 2 engines pulling or a puller and a pusher when modeling?
I've not seen that particularly. The pusher, you can't use a pusher if the single engine can take the entire train up the hill, because that creates problems. That creates train dynamic problems that will cause derailments. However, if you follow the approach I took, which is that a single engine cannot take the whole train up the hill, you got to have both, then the 2 engines can work, and they don't even have to be synchronized. One can be slipping a little bit, but as long as they're both pushing or pulling, the whole train will move up the hill. You know, model trains, it's odd. Model trains have completely different physics than real trains. Real trains will slow down and see a lot higher friction on curves. Oddly, curves with long framed locomotives, we have used sharp curves in the model sense. Like my 210Os, they will grip better in a curve than they will on the straight, because they're kind of ratcheted into the track more rigorously than they are on straight track. So they'll pull better on a curve. So it's completely different physics just about than real railroads, or at least variation on the physics.
Yeah, you can't scale physics.
Yeah, it's a weird deal.
Well, Bill, thanks so very much. Look forward to your next one. Thank you.
Jim,
Okay, you're welcome.
I
Maybe a little bit yet, Jim, before I get another presentation together. So bear with me on that.
Yeah, that's fine. Just let me know.
Sure, will do.
Thanks. Now I'd like to turn to Jeff Bunza and his discussion about animation. So Jeff, it's up to you, sir.
Okay, let's get a hold of this. Okay, am I on the screen? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yep.
Okay, when last we left off, we were talking about sequencing with Arduinos and how an Arduino basically gave you the ability to have some number of switches depending on the model that you used. One of the things I wanted to add to the last presentation is that I typically start out putting sketches together with an Arduino Uno, simply because it's a little bit bigger, it's a little easier to make changes to, I can add things to it. But then invariably, when I want to go and actually model something, I'll switch to this thing called a Pro Mini. And the basic reason is it's much smaller and it's cheap. I've seen these actually offered for $1.65 a piece, and they range all over the map up to about $8. I usually buy them in quantity 10. I usually get mine from China, and 224 is, I think, the last price I paid. So the reason for using each one of these varies, but I typically will start with either the Uno or the Mega down here, and I'll migrate to the Mini. The thing that I had to get in my mind is that the Pro Mini is about $2 a piece. I had to start thinking about it as a component, as another tool, because the substitutions invariably ran into more money, cost me more time, cost me more space, and kept pushing me back to using the small, as effective unit as the other one. So that's just a comment from the last time. This is going to be the last in this current series on animation talks. I need to take a hiatus to deal with other demands on my time. And I thought we would actually leave off with the start of talking about animation with movement. And of course, this is one of the characteristics of looking at something and you sensing that it's alive. We talked about all of these different kinds of movements the last time. And in considering guided and steered, you have to realize that there's something that's actually going to steer them or guide the movement. And we do that with sensors. Sensors are another kind of switch, and they can also feed into an Arduino and be detected. The last thing in the sequence that I didn't touch upon very much before is that an Arduino can actually do something that you can't get with other kinds of mechanical switches for the most part. And that is that you can actually generate a random number and create a random effect. Now, it's not truly random by mathematical standards, but it will give you the impression that the sequence is just jumping all over the place. For example, in the building lighting that I demonstrated at least once or twice, if you actually were to calculate when that pattern for the entire building set of lights would repeat, it comes out to something like 1.37 years. So no one is going to stand at your layout trying to look for a repeat in the pattern. But you can certainly get to things where you could easily determine the pattern, and those tend to be boring. To generate movement, you're going to use different kinds of motors. The big issue with animation and movement is getting things to run slow and smooth, no jerky motion, regardless of the scale that you're operating in. And typically you're looking for very small motors. My friend says that I have the largest collection of motors, particularly small ones that he's ever seen. I've been collecting small motors that are particularly geared for over 20 years. And I typically will go and look for something that's less than $2 a throw. And a lot of the motors I'm going to talk about today, you could have obtained at one point or other for less than $2 a throw. I'm also going to wind up today by talking about servos. And a servo is a very special kind of motor that it turns out you're able to control and direct trivially with an Arduino. And that's going to become a really important thing, and we'll try and get to that. These are from my collection of motors. You could get motors with a right-hand drive that are geared. The N20 refers to the actual size of the motor here. The N10 is about half the length of this motor up here. There are very tiny motors. If you have a cell phone, sometimes it vibrates. These are the motors that actually generate the vibration. It's a tiny 4x8 millimeter motor, and on the end of it, there's an off-center weight. And as it rotates very, very quickly, these things tend to have like 12,000 RPM associated with them. When you weight it down, they don't go that fast, but they will generate the vibration. And that's why the off-center weight. It turns out if you look closely here, you can't really see how that weight is attached. Well, originally it starts out fitting very easily on the shaft, which is about 0.6 millimeters. And then if you look really closely, you'll find a dimple right there. And that's where they hammer it and lock down the weight on the shaft. If you see a weight attached like that, it's almost impossible to get off without damaging the shaft and therefore the motor inside. So if you go after little tiny motors like these, and I'll give you an example of how I use them, you really should look for them without the weight attached. You can find them like that. These are great motors down here. These are 8 millimeters across here, cylinder, but they've got a planetary gear head over here. Planetary gear has a gear right in the middle, surrounded by usually 3 gears, and they're stacked one on top of the other. This has more stacked up and therefore goes slower at the shaft on the output. And you'll, actually, I have this reversed. This is the 36 millimeter, the 36 RPM motor, and this is the 1200 RPM motor. So they're backwards. More gears means you have more gear down, means that it's going to actually turn the end shaft slower. So that's what's going on there. Here, one of the very simplest examples of an animation with movement, a simple sign that you can turn around. It's got a collar down here. It's got a shaft that goes all the way up, and that shaft is directly connected to one of the geared motors. The collar over here, it turns out, is fundamental to making this thing work, because if you didn't have that, this thing will tilt and wobble all over the place. So this is a telescoping tube right here. And by using that telescoping tube anchored into the base, you don't get any wobble, and it really comes out working pretty well. Here we have a pretty simple kind of animation, very simple design, no Arduinos or anything else, just like the rotating sign. It's got a screw shaft over here going back and forth with a magnetic clutch. So there's a pair of magnets under here and a pair of magnets underneath the forklift. And it's pulling the forklift back and forth. And when it gets to the far end, it'll trip that little tiny micro switch there and a little tiny micro switch at the other end. And that is going to activate a locking relay, a latching relay, and that will simply make it go back and forth. And that's all it does. You can control the speed by controlling the speed of the motor over here, and that is a geared head motor on the end as well. But the real drive down on the gearing is actually the shaft. That's a 440 screw, no, that's a 256 screw that's attached directly to the axle of the motor, and it's just driving this back and forth. So it's pretty easy to do. I mentioned before what you could use those very tiny motors. Remember, this is only 4 millimeters across by about either 6 or 8 millimeters long. And I use this as a stall motor, the same kind of stall motor that you would see throwing a switch, except this is really tiny. And the critical issue with a stall motor is some motor that when you stall it out is not going to draw a lot of current and it's not going to heat up. So this is absolutely critical to this. And all this does is activate for 1/2 of a turn. So literally you're driving it forward and it will turn 1/2 turn. You drive it back and it turns 1/2 turn the other way and stalls in each way. What is it for? To reverse the head of the engineer that we're about to see. That guy has been reworked from an old Plasticville figure of a reverend. You can see the steps to rework it. Excise his head, put a shaft there, and away you go. And here's where we'll see it. Oh, sorry. Push the wrong button. Let's try again. There we go. Now watch the engineer. He's always going to face the direction that the easel is going to go. This is an HO model, by the way. And here we go reverse. There he goes. And he'll go back and forth like that. It's a really interesting little tiny animation that'll catch people's eye when they're least expecting and generate some interesting comments on your layout. Here we have another very simple animation. This uses a belt drive. This is actually an elastic band, elastic stretchy cord that's used for beading. The reason it's used is simply because you can't get a motor and its drive close enough here because this is an HO scale, fully animated barber pole. It's not like the ones that they sell, which are actually closer to 8O scale, and they claim you can use it. Well, if you use it, you know, it's twice as large as it needs to be. The little globe at the top is another bead that you place an LED into. We talked all about LEDs, and here's the side mechanism here. And that's all it is. And you can get an idea of how it operates. So the barber pole turns, the light lights, and that's the little animation. The inside is actually a picture that's placed there of a barber shop. Bob's Barber sign is also backlit, akin to Harry's TV sign that we talked about once before. Here's another animation, again, very simple movement. This is a band drive. This is a simple elastic that you can get at a store like Michael's, and it's butt glued together around a motor-driven capstan. Here's the motor up here, driving this capstan down here, and this is just a pulley on the other end. This is a modified figure that we're going to place inside of a coach, and he's going to become the ticket taker. And I showed you a very short snippet of this before. Now in this one, it's kind of an oddball because I'm actually using a decoder that's nothing but a lighting decoder, and it turns on an Arduino that does the animation. And in this case, you're starting and stopping the conductor doing his ticket taking randomly along the way. So there's an example of introducing randomness in the animation. Oop, did it again. Okay. Okay, here's another one where, again, there's there's no Arduino involved. It's a simple motor drive with that planetary drive motor that I showed you before. In this case, that motor is right here, and it's driving an offset cam that's going to raise and lower this arm over here, and that is actuating this little tiny pin like you would have for a track switch, and it's going to raise and lower the arm here of the blacksmith. But at the same time, it's going to actuate a switch over here, a little tiny micro switch, and that is going to trigger a little tiny audio player over here, and this is the result you get. So you get a very nice little blacksmith animation. No Arduino involved, very simple trigger, which is just a switch. And those switches, in fact, are the key to a lot of this. And Arduinos, you remembered, can't drive a lot of current. But if you want to drive a large incandescent lamp, or you want to drive something that's going to take a lot of current, you can take that pin and amplify it with a very cheap transistor and drive a solenoid, a lamp, a motor, or any other kind of higher power device with very little expense. The resistor and the transistor would probably cost you 60 cents, if that. There are more sophisticated things you can do from an Arduino pin. You can directly drive a relay, and that relay can act like this switch over here, except that now you can have a relay that's latching. You can have a relay that's 4-pole double throw. You can make it do all kinds of interesting things. And there's the DigiKey catalog numbers for that. You can also run an animation with animation motor with a dual H bridge. And eventually we'll get to talk about that in the next series, the follow-on series. You can also use a DCC decoder in conjunction with an Arduino to drive things, and that generates some interesting things too. Last for this time, I wanted to touch on servos. A servo motor is not just a free-running motor. A servo motor actually needs a very particular kind of signal to drive it. And the typical servo will go a half a turn. Now, they're typically talking about a quality servo will go from 0 to 180 degrees. It turns out the really El Cheapo servos will go from about 10 degrees to about 170 degrees. And these are the ones that'll cost you like $1.69. Those are typically 9G, 9-gram servos. They look a little bit like this, but they also come in smaller versions. This is a 3G servo. That's pretty small. There's also a 4.7G servo. That's sort of a little bit halfway. The way you drive that is you have to feed it an electronic pulse train, a set of pulses repeating over and over again. And this is critical. If there's no pulses there, the servo doesn't know what to do. But if the pulses are there and they're well formed, then the width of the pulse determines where in the arc it's going to position itself. So you start with a width about 1 millisecond wide. It'll position at the 0 degree end. 1.5 milliseconds wide, you position at 90. And 2 milliseconds wide, it'll go to 180. Now, these are approximations, by the way. You also provide it with 4.5 to 6 volts DC. So you power it, but you need this signal. Now, it just so happens that the Arduino can generate that signal trivially. And even the little one that I showed you before can generate 18 of those signals simultaneously to control 18 servos. So that's an advantage of it. You can also control one. So that $2 module, that $2 component I was trying to emphasize before, can actually control these. Now, with servo control is a couple of things you want. You want to know the accuracy of the position. And the second thing is you want to maintain it sometimes. If you want that position held, then it has to be powered. If you let go of the power, it might joggle back and forth one way or the other. The other neat thing about it is you can attach these things called horns, and they go up here. You can see one attached over here, and they are the things that turn. So you provide leverage by providing short and long horns, one-sided, four-sided, etc. You can also get a little tiny thing called a blade servo, and this goes back and forth. They simply take that power, and using a similar method, they're going to position it from one end to the other, and that's only about roughly 1/2 inch. But it's really neat because then you get linear motion that way. I was talking with Jim before this started, and he was interested in raising and lowering a pantograph or a trolley pole. This is the kind of servo we were talking about before. You can power them and control them, and control is the big issue. There are commercial units that you can use, or you can use Arduinos. And here are a couple of different examples. Here's a button control to move the servos that are documented in that article that I cited last time, Introduction, a Modeler's Introduction to Arduinos. And there's another one that I think is also in that group of references. And this is DCC multifunction decoder control. This is actually using an Arduino as a DCC decoder that can drive 17 servos independently. And you can do that with either an accessory set of switches, or you can do that with 17 functions on a mobile decoder. Here's an example using servos just to control doors. Now, obviously, here's a cargo door sliding back and forth. You'll also see the figure approaching the door and being taken away from the door after it opens. This is all being done simply by this Arduino that's running over here. Here's a door that just is going to pivot. Typical door opening. We could use it on our gray house, in fact. And I want to show you behind the scenes what's actually going on to give you an idea of how those servos are actually operating. So here's the servo that's opening the door. Here's the servo that's moving the figure. And here's that little tiny blade servo that's opening the side door. And notice they all have a linkage to the door. This one's got a very straightforward linkage, and all it's doing is moving it back and forth. Here's the linkage to the sliding door over here. Very simple, very straightforward. The linkage to move the figure is actually very direct off of the horn of this servo over here. So you can use these servos to get all kinds of interesting, slow, controlled motion. I mentioned a couple of things before. Modeler's Introduction to the Arduino up top. DCC projects using the Arduino will show you how to create that DCC decoder that, in fact, will go and control those 17 servos. So I hope you enjoyed this introduction to animation with movement. When we resume in the next series, Jim has been kind enough to ask me back. We'll be talking about more kinds of control for movement with Arduinos and sequencing for animation. But we're also going to talk about sound and synchronizing the sound with movement, synchronizing sound with light, and that'll make for even more interesting kinds of animations. Are there any questions?
Jeff, on the sliding door on towards the end of the presentation, there was a horizontal sliding door.
Yep.
The lever that moved that back and forth had a bend in it.
Yeah.
Was that for fine adjustment?
Yeah. That's because you can be sloppy if you have that bend in it. Think about it as a linkage for a switch machine throw. If you got that bend in it and you're a little bit off, that bend will take up the slack. So it won't push too far, it won't jam anything, and it works really great. And that's why the bend is there.
I kind of like an Omega spring, sir.
You got it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Jeff,
Yo,
if you can send me that last slide with all the stuff in it, the links, I can put that in the chat if you can send me the a text file, or just send me the slide so I can cut and paste.
let's see. What I,
Yeah, send
okay,
it to
what
my,
I'll do is I'll,
modeling@gmail.com.
well, what I'll do is I'll put in the chat a link to download the entire slide set
Oh, that works too.
as a PDF, okay?
That'll work for everybody.
Okay, very good. I'll do that.
Jeff, thank you so very much. This has been just fascinating stuff. The whole series has. And I know you've got to take off some time here, but please let us know whenever you're available to come back and do the next part of the series, because it's just fascinating to me.
Well, thank you very much. And we'll take off where we left off here next time.
Fantastic. Thanks so very much.
There's another question in the chat. Can the blade switch be used to line a switch?
Yes, there is enough throw for, I think probably it may even be enough throw for O scale, but there's enough throw in that. It's about 1/2 inch. I'd have to go and look at the actual spec. The amazing thing about the servos, they can actually exert a fair amount of force. So unless you've got something like a Pico switch with the spring still in it, where there's going to be a lot of force to overcome. If you take that spring out of a Pico switch, it'll throw the switch without any problem. And by the way, much to my chagrin, when I came out with the DCC decoder that was you could use to drive servos, that was the most common use that people had, was to control switches with cheap servos.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now,
I think
I do-
have,
Okay, I think now we need to turn to our featured modeler, David Schultz. David, I really appreciate you being here tonight. I'm looking forward to your scratch building of your passenger fleet. I've really been looking forward to this. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to you, sir.
All right, thank you, Jim. I appreciate having the opportunity to show off some of my skills. I will hand this over to my photographer tonight. You probably recognize him. He's been on here a couple of times. You're turned around?
Yep.
All right, now. Very good. Well, I figured I'd start with what I started with simple. You know, I started with Lionel trains, and then I met Bill Flint and Bob Chellen, and they turned me into O-scale because I love building things, and there wasn't much to build in Lionel. So, of course, the first thing I started with was kits. And this was a little Northwest Shortline kit of an NP caboose that I built. So, you know, I started by putting an interior in the caboose because I thought I'd take it to the next level. In fact, if you can see down in here, I'll use my little pointer. There's eggs in the fry pan and a little coffee pot on here, along with the plates and cups. So that's, you know, it was my first attempt at doing this. Actually, the first attempts got sold. And then this was the final one that I was happy with. So I kept this one on hand. So next we go into the scratch or the kit bashing portion that I went into. Now, this is a Williams shell of a Trainmaster. And I didn't really have much use for a Trainmaster, but I could use an H1044. So I chopped it down. The car bodies tend to be a little too wide. The walkway is a little too narrow. So I basically cut this down, narrowed all the parts, and then put it back together into a model of an H1044 that eventually I will finish. But that started off when you're on a HO budget in O scale, you have to do stuff like this because you could buy these for about $10 back in the day. And then you scratch build or you kit bash into what you really need. So, and then from there, we moved into our passenger. Now, the first passenger cars I ever built, I made the floors. And that is an effort and futility. I finally found a source for these floors. They come from the Indianapolis Car Company. It went out of business years ago, but he made a lot of this stuff. And I was able to find these, guy in Chicago had them, and I bought them for $10 each. And it's a lot simpler than gluing all these little pieces on a flat piece of plastic. So that's how I started switching over to that. And then we'll show the passenger cars. Now this is a model of a Northern Pacific coach that they purchased in the 60s. It's modeled after a Chicago Northwestern coach. The NP had borrowed some Northwestern coaches and then bought a few of them from the Northwestern when they were downsizing their trains. And the NP was so impressed with these style of cars that they bought a few of their own. This car is one that the Duluth Museum happens to own, which is the 517, which was originally Northern Pacific. So you can see how I laminate 2 sheets of plastic together, 20 thousandths, and I use super glue to laminate together. And I find that when I use super glue, it doesn't tend to warp. When I use the plastic cement, things will warp over time. This car is about 5 years old already. Shows you how slow I am. You just laminate the plastic together, and then I would cut the windows out. And I have kind of a unique way I would do the windows. I have that book by Charles Riddisell on NP passenger cars. So I would draw out the sides. And then what I will do first is I'll take the nibbler that I get from Micromark. You poke a hole in the middle, and then you would take the nibbler and start cutting away at the window. And then I made these little blocks. Now this one's probably too big. This is for bigger windows. So I'll use my other one. I make these little blocks and I round the edge. I square them up in my true sander and I round the edge. And then I use self-adhesive sandpaper. And then what I can do is after I got the hole roughed out, I slide these in here like so. And then you just start sanding, start doing, this number here till you square them up. And then you can flip it around to do the other. And on this car, this was, there's a lot of windows on this car. So that was one of the projects I took to the hotel with me and worked on it for hours, truing up all the windows in this thing. And then the next part of scratch building the car is you got to start building the interior, of course. So what I would do is the first car I ever built, I did the entire floor in one piece. And then using the book, I would draw on the floor what went where, the walls and such. Well, the problem was trying to pull that whole thing out. So now what I do is I'll use one piece and then I'll strategically cut it in areas. And that way you can drop the pieces into place. And they're easy to remove. If you ever need to remove them to add more detail, they're easy to pull out and to add your extra detail to it. Then the coach seats, of course, will go in the middle here. That'll just be one piece with all the seats attached to it. So that's how I went from that. And then I'll show you some of my completed cars. Let's see. This was the very first one I built. That's an NP 10-6 sleeper. The NP only ever had 2 of these cars. They originally bought them to go with the Lark on the Southern Pacific out of Portland. And most of their years, they were painted in the Lark paint scheme, which I think was like a 2-tone gray. And they were in the SP colors, but they were lettered Northern Pacific. Well, I think it was 62 or 63, the SP gave them back to the Northern Pacific and said, we don't need them. So they painted them in the 2-tone green. And I'm not really sure. I trust they used them as kind of replacement cars when they had to be in the other cars were in the shop. So, but anyway, this one, all the stuff is glued in the car. And that's when I discovered, well, this isn't going to work in the future if I ever need to take them out for some reason. And that's when I started making the interiors removable. But these cars also have microscope slides for windows. I've learned how to cut the glass and put them in there. And that way I don't have the problem with scratching or the windows turning yellow over the years. And then I glued file type paper on there to simulate the window shades. So that was that car. And then we move on. Put this one, man.
Dave, I got to ask you, what's your secret to cutting the glass?
Well, I'll tell you, Jim, I'll show you what I do. I can just do a real quick demonstration. Oops. It's not really hard. It took me a while to learn how to do this. But what I will do is I will use a dial caliper to measure the opening. And then I discovered if I add 30 thousandths to that dial caliper and then hold it. In fact, where's my caliper at here? Just so what I will do is I will measure the opening on the car. So we'll just take this one as a rough estimate. So there we have 880. So what I will do is add 30 thousandths to that, and that adjusts for the tip of the diamond cutter. And what I'll do is take the microscope slide and I'll put the dial caliper in here. Now the trick that I learned was that if you press really hard on the diamond scribe, it'll scratch the glass pretty heavily, but then it won't break properly. So the trick was to just lightly slide it across the glass, where you just get, and you won't be able to see it, but it's a very light line, and then it'll snap right on there. Now that will be perfect this way, as you can see. And then what I do is I measure the other direction and cut it the other way, same way. And then I bought those little diamond burrs from Micromark again, and I'll put them in the Dremel, dip the glass in water, and then round the edges to fit in the window or fit in the cutout. But you just round the edges. And amazingly enough, with those diamond burrs, it doesn't take a lot of effort to do that, but you got to keep the tip cool. Otherwise the glass will start to shard and break. But pretty simple technique. But the real trick was just lightly scratch the glass. You don't want to press hard.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, like I say, I fought it for the longest time. I kept getting moon breaks and everything else. And I was watching a glass cutter one time, and he was just lightly scratching the glass, and it would snap right on that scratch line. I thought, okay, maybe I'm just pushing too hard. So anyway, you can buy these microscope slides on eBay for a couple dollars a box, and you get like 100. Well, each box has got 72 slides in it. So
I don't know if this company is around yet.
oh, I don't know if they are anymore. Anyway, if you look on eBay, you can find all kinds of microscope slides. And then lately, for like, well, a little off subject, but what the heck? This engine here I'm doing for a friend. These sliding windows on this engine are done with what do you call them? Slip glass. It's what, when you put a sample on the microscope slide, you'd cover it with these cover glasses, and they are ultra thin. And that is really, you'd really lightly touch that, but they cut just as easily as the other. But I got these included with the microscope sides. So these side windows and the little vent window here are covered in these slip covers.
Huh.
But same trick, you can use a little emery cloth to round the edges, or you can use the little diamond burrs to put a little bit of a curve to it. Works slicker than I'll get out. And then the headlight here, I just took a piece of glass, and then I would just sit there and grind around and around little by little until it would fit in that opening. So that's actual microscope slide in there also. And then I use the old the canopy glue from the remote airplane people. And you can see it's a little sloppy here, but now after this dries, I'll take a wet Q-tip and just go around, and that'll come right off the glass easily, and it'll clean up like this one here is now. So I've learned to use microscope slides on all this stuff, and it's kind of amazing. So anyway, that's the quick course on that kind of nonsense.
And you're just barely touching the glass.
Yeah, you just almost the weight of the scribe is about all you need. You don't have to push hardly at all. And when you do it, you'll see a very light line, and then it'll snap right on that line. And somebody who really knows glass could probably explain why that happens. But if you push hard and put a scratch line in there, then it'll break. You'll get all kinds of weird breaks. But if you just lightly scratch that surface, that's all it takes. And then you put your fingers on either side, and it'll just pop right on that line.
I'll be darned. Thanks.
Craziest thing I've ever seen. But it works. Like I say, I use microscope slides and all this stuff now. So here's an example of the interior on this. This is a duplex sleeper that I made. And you can remove each of the parts out of this thing. So take the one end. Oh. So if I ever need to redo this or update it, it's pretty easy to remove all the pieces out of the car. So then you just have the bare bones car, and then you can drop the pieces in. I started using printed paper for the flooring in these cars, and you can get all kinds of different carpet patterns. And here's like a tile floor that I printed off on this end of the car. And I've got some sheets here. I'm building some commuter cars, and I'll show you those here in a little bit.
Have you ever looked into 3D printing for these components?
You know, I have a friend, once again, on these commuter cars. I'll show you a couple of parts he 3D printed for me. But, you know, I enter a lot of this stuff in NMRA contests. And of course, I think they just ruled that a 3D part is not a scratch built part. So, you know, if you use too much 3D printing in the cars, you're probably going to lose points on the scratch build again. So I kind of like to keep my skills honed and scratch build all this stuff. But sometimes it gets to be a little too much. When you're building 15 cars, it's like, you know what? I'm not making 15 bathrooms. So sometimes, yeah, you just give it up and go with the 3D printed part. But I do have a friend in town who will print parts, and I'll show you some of that here in a little bit on these commuter cars. But anyway, that's how those just fit back in. So at any time you want to upgrade the car, you can just pull the parts out, and you know, if things improve, you want, you know, better parts or whatever, you can pull out the old parts, stick in the new. All right. This next car has kind of a fun story to it. And that's Columbia here. This is my diner of an SP&S diner, Columbia. The actual car was on its way to the scrapyard in Saskatchewan. And it got to Alexandria, Minnesota, which at the time, that's where I lived. And the story I'd heard was that the brakes locked up on it and they slid the wheels. So the crew set it out in Alexandria. Well, BN came up, assessed the problem, and decided to sell it right on site and not even bother with it. And they took sealed bids, and a local restaurant in town ended up buying the car and moving it out to their restaurant. Unfortunately, today the car is still sitting there, but they've totally gutted the car. All of the underbody stuff is gone. The only thing that's left is the actual shell of the car. So it's an empty tube and the trucks, but they've got like 8-inch flat spots on those wheels. They offered it to the museum here in Duluth, and they went down and took a look at it and just determined that so much of the stuff was gone. It would be too costly to restore. So I thought, you know what, I need to make a tribute car to that car. So we made this SP&S diner, and James decided to build a Milwaukee Road diner. And so we kind of went head to head on this one, and we entered him in the contest in Chicago. And after much ado, James beat me by 1 point. I got 120, he got 121, and he hasn't let me forget it yet.
Why would I?
Yeah. So, but I even have pictures of Jim Hill on the end of the car. I don't know if you'll be able to see that or not. Oh, where's my pointer? Here. There's Jim Hill in that part of the car. Here's his son Louis Hill in this one portrait here. And once again, we can take out the parts to show off the kitchen. So we have the coffee urn here. We got some pots on the stove. We got the grill on the end here, the sinks. And they've even got knives hanging on the wall here. You can see the little knives hanging on the wall along with the sinks. And then one other little bit of history on this car, which is kind of interesting. This painting here of Mount St. Helens was done by my wife's great uncle, I think it was. And my son, Michael, was able to shrink that down, the painting. We took a picture of the painting, we shrunk it way down, and I've got it hanging on the wall here on Columbia. So I thought that was kind of funny to have a picture from a relative that had been painted. But has this car got this car here has, when you're building pasture cars, you know, it's hard to get between them to uncouple them. So one of the little tricks we did is we actually have removable diaphragms. There's 4 magnets on here, little rare earth magnets, and then there's 4 magnets on here. And so if you want, you can pull the diaphragms out, uncouple the car, and then you simply bring the diaphragm back in and it snaps back into place. So I'm retrofitting all my cars now with the snap-on diaphragms because that's pretty slick for uncoupling. All right. That is Columbia.
I know we have some questions via the chat, but I'm
Oh,
kind
okay.
of missing them.
Oh, okay.
Let's see here. Questions via chat. Besides Clark, yeah. Okay. Says we ought to double the pay of the cameraman.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Clark put in here about the steric carbide scribe.
Yes.
The pocket one and another one. And then somebody put here about working in a glass shop. And you're right on about that light touch.
Oh, the light scribe, yeah. Yeah, this is the little diamond one that was at Micromark. I don't remember, I paid $8 or $10 for it years ago. And it just got a little piece of diamond in the end. And like I say, it doesn't take much. You just lightly scribe that glass and amazingly enough, it'll snap right along that line. But if you try to, I mean, the first time I was going back and forth. And then when I break it, you'd get this big moon break. And it was like, what am I doing wrong? So Watson, that glass
Dan
cutter one
Cohen
time.
has a question.
Okay.
Do you work from plans or only from photographs?
No, I worked with the Charles Wazidlo book is a book that he put out years and years ago on Northern Pacific, Great Northern, SPNS, and Burlington Carter. Big, thick book. They're about $150 to buy now. But in there, all the plans, conveniently enough, are O-scale plans. So it makes it very easy for somebody like me. I'll lay the floor out right alongside the actual blueprint, and then I can draw in the lines, what goes where, the seat centers, where the walls would go, where the bathrooms are, where the toilets are located. It makes it very easy. And I'll draw on the flooring where all this stuff goes. So when I'm building, I can just look at the floor plan right on what I've drawn on the plastic, and then just put the walls in, put the bathrooms in, all the detail parts. So that's what I use, is that book to draw out all my plans.
Let's see here. Ted Becker asked, what do you use for the roofs?
The roofs are actually, I cheated when I said I scratch build everything. The roofs are American Standard roofs. American Standard used to build passenger car kits years ago, and I buy roofs whenever I can find them. Sometimes I have to buy the whole kit, and then I'll put my own sides on. I'll put my own details to the flooring. I'll usually sell off the sides, the detail parts, because the NP is stuff totally different. The trucks, of course, are Chemtron trucks, because the NP was a huge user of the outside swing hanger. Their older cars had the 41Ns, which had an inside swing hanger, but you always have to pull the truck out to rebush those swing hangers. When we're on the outside swing hanger, you can just put the bushing, you take the weight off the car, you can put the bushings in without removing the truck. So the NP went to those outside swing hangers pretty early on in their career.
From YouTube, Barb Butcher. How do you install the windows? So I guess she's asking, once you get them all cut, how do you get them in? Make them stay in?
What I do is they're basically press fit at that point. If my openings end up being pretty accurate, but I do double check every window that I put in. I'll double check to make sure. I'll slide the window in, and sometimes you got to trim the plastic a little bit or whatever. But then what I'll use is that canopy glue again. I'll put a coating around the outside edge of it, slide it into place, and I'm not worried about getting fingerprints on it. When the glue dries, I'll take a wet Q-tip and then go around and clean the glass. And the canopy glue will actually fill in little slight variations that I may have missed, and it dries clear. And they look really good that way. But that's how I install the windows. They're almost literally a press fit into and then they're flush. Now, one of the things I'm thinking about doing with the 3D printer is having the gasket made for the outside of the windows. I think that would take it to the next level if they could actually print like that rubber gasket that you see on the outside of the windows. Just spray those black and glue them on over the top of the windows. I think that'd be pretty cool stuff. But But as of right now, it's the way they are. I don't have a gasket in there. And eventually they'll probably have a technology where that'll be readily available. They can print hundreds of them and I'll be able to put those on all my cars.
Now I had a question.
Okay.
When you were showing the one of the underframes or the semi-completed cars,
Okay.
on the bottom of it, there was, it looked like some white plastic. I guess you build your own bolsters and stuff.
The bolsters are, I know what he's talking about. Oh, okay. The bolsters are scale. They're the old Walthers. They're primed, but they're the old Walthers bolsters. And this one here is modified. I modified this to hold a Katy coupler, and then I actually made a mold of it so that I don't have to keep modifying these metal pieces. It's kind of cheating because, you know, I don't steal stuff from other people, but this took so much work to modify this that I made a mold of that one part that I had heavily modified. This piece I still buy. It's a lead part that you get, or white metal, and I use those, and it adds weight to the car. I like to use the metal parts as much as possible because I like to get my passenger cars up there around 2.5 to 3 pounds each. So that's what those white parts are. This is the molded piece. These I actually buy from Scale City at. So that's what's going on there. All right, next. Well, I guess what we'll do here then is I'll go to the pièce de résistance. This was the car that I made for the last time I was in Chicago. And this is kind of not an unusual car, but it's an interesting car. And I had a lot of people doubt that this really existed because they'd never heard of an RPO and a dormitory being combined on a train. Normally, most railroads used to run just an RPO, and then the dormitory car was separate. Well, the NP, of course, didn't need, on the North Coast Limited, they apparently didn't need a lot of mail room. So the mail room was only 30 feet wide or long. And then the rest of the car, they made into a dormitory for their employees. So, but you know, bunks in every bed, just a couple showers on this end. And then once again, I'm using the printed flooring from just a computer printout that my son Michael likes to do that for me. He'll find different floorings and such. And I wanted a black and white tile for the employee section. And the wood floor on this end, on the RPO end, was kind of fascinating. I used actual lumber, and I took some pictures of the RPO section at the museum, and the floor had kind of an orangish tint to it. So I thought, well, all right. So I took the flooring and I took some Milwaukee Road paint and I diluted it way down into a stain. And I just kind of ran it over the boards and it gave it that orange look to it. Well, then I used to glue it inside the car here. I used JB Weld, and I would put a thin layer of JB Weld on the board and then put it in place and press down. Well, all of a sudden it's oozing up between the boards, and I was just frustrated with it. So I'm taking my finger and wiping it out of there, and I noticed that it was leaving gray streaks on the floor. And I started looking at that and I thought, that is turning out fantastic. So instead of, I figured I would sand it to get rid of the gray. And after I got done with it, I thought that looks better than any floor I've ever put in. The letters on the table, my son Michael once again found a website with RPO canceled letters, and he copied probably 50 of those and shrunk them down to O scale. And then he has access to a very high dollar printer, and he printed off these letters. You can't, with the naked eye, you can't read them, but if you use a jeweler's loop, you can actually read the addresses on all those letters. So I thought that was pretty fantastic. But I made the pigeonholes on this car are little brass tubes, square tubing that I stacked up, soldered together, and then I machined off in my mill. And so you get all the pigeonholes, and then you have the package area. You got the tables where the mail was sorted, and all of that is built out of brass and scratch built. This is plastic, but the tables down there below are all scratch built from brass. And then the mail bags are in there. You can see them probably this way. You can see the little mail sacks in the rack.
I'll be darned.
So, and then these are, and once again, I don't know if I have any of this stuff laying around handy here, but this material here is the foil wrap from like Marlboro hard packs. Working on the railroad, about half the people there smoke, and they're always throwing those hard packs in the garbage, and I'm always digging them out of the garbage and ripping the foil out of them, because I find that stuff really handy. It's silver on one side, so you can use it like diamond tread plate on one side, and the other side is a paper that's textured. Well, I find it works perfect for tablecloths, for mail sacks, for anything you want. I use in one of the cars, it's the antimacassars on the seats. You just lightly touch them up with a little bit of a dull white or whatever color you need. So the mail sacks are that foil paper from those cigarette packs. It's rather amazing stuff. I use it all the time. The shower curtains are that paper. So. Anyway, that was my grandiose piece.
That's magnificent. That is beautiful.
Well, thank you, Jim.
That's got a whole lot of. That's got a whole lot of, as the sausage commercial said, we know it's there.
Yeah, where that really comes into play is under here. You know it's there, but nobody can really see it. Yeah, but it's all the works underneath the car. But I love putting in the steam lines, which is basically heavy solder wrapped in masking tape.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like wrapped steam lines. And it's easy to bend, easy to flex around. You can do all kinds of strange things with it. So it makes it real simple to make a steam line out of it. A lot of the wiring I use, I'll take brass and I'll heat it up so that it loses its temper. And then I can wind it together like 3 strands, solder it in certain places, and use it as cabling around the insides of the car. So then that'll bring us to my latest project. I'll bring it over to the table here. And a couple of people out there are going to know that I'm doing this because they're always catching me working on stuff while I'm watching the Zoom meeting. They're always asking me, what are you doing while you're sitting there watching that? I am building 4 Chicago Northwestern commuter cars. And once again, I took the ICC flooring that I bought, but I had to cut out the middle for the steps. And here's that paper I was talking about that I used for the tread plate. Can you get in on that? I suppose the light might be a little bright there or something. There, that might work better. So these are, I had to modify some American Standard trucks, had to cut off the ears and do a couple of other little modifications to make it look like the Northwestern trucks. These cars here, the plumbing underneath, what I'm going to do is I'm putting wipers on the trucks because I want the lights to light in this car. And what I'm going to do is run it through the plumbing underneath the car here. And then the way I'm going to get it up to the roof is the handrails pass through the bottom here, and I will solder them to these wires. And then the up above in the stairwell area, it'll look like grab irons in the stairwell, but up above there'll be wires going to a decoder, and that will turn the lights on and off. And but I've yet to put the wipers in, but we're getting close with this. But this was a challenge. I'm not normally a Northwestern modeler, but a guy challenged me to build some commuter cars, I think because he wants me to sell them to him. So, and I'm willing to do it, but I love tackling stuff like this. Yeah. So, and I got the sides cut. I used the same technique I used before. Now this is just 20 thousandths so far. And I will laminate some pieces on the inside here to strengthen the side and to make I'm going to try a different technique this time. This is just 20 thousandths thick. This time I'm going to make areas, squared off areas where I can just drop a microscope slide right into the area. And then I won't have to try and press fit all these little windows in here. So we're going to try a little different technique on this one. But I used my little sanding block. Once again, sitting in the hotel, watching terrible TV or whatever, and just sit here and sand these out to get them looking about the same. Now I happen to grab the side for the cab car. I'm going to be making a cab car for this. But anyway, you can see this will fit on here as such. So we'll have the Chicago Northwestern. I chose the Northwestern cars because they were smooth sided. Who wants to build fluted sides? And then we'll grab some of the detailing parts that we're making for this to show off all the goodies that we're doing. And we'll grab an end here, and then I'll just grab one of these stairways. So these are the, I made a mold of these parts. These are the stairways that go up into the upper levels of the car. And once again, who wants to make 16 of those? So I made 4 and got this, I went down to the museum once again, and I measured these up, and I made these molds, the masters for these stairways. And these will mount in the corners of the car like this. And there'll be 4 of them, 1 in each corner, and you'll have the upper area and then the lower area. These are the dividers that go in the middle. These will go in here like this. And then let's see, what else did I have to show off here? Anyway, the flooring. I should be more organized. But anyway, we searched and searched and searched. We finally found this stuff under industrial flooring. And once again, this is just printed off on a computer. And we'll glue these onto the car to make the flooring for the lower section, and it'll also go into the upper section. Once I have this glued down, then I can put in the seats. So
this guy is a superb builder. He's scratch building O-scale passenger cars.
Well, let's see here.
Yeah.
What was I looking for? Yeah, I want, I guess, a couple more of these. So anyway, I was gonna, do I have that mold handy? I thought I did. That doesn't matter. Anyway, I made the mold for these so that I wouldn't have to keep making them all. This is one of the masters. You can see the rubber that was trapped on the steps and such, but the molds turned out very well. So I'm quite pleased with how those turned out, but they'll be just like that. And then of course we have the, this is the cab car end that I made. Once again, I made these ends. I cut them out. I put the rivets on here. I put receptacles where the marker lights would plug in and such. And then I added and I made a mold of this. So once again, I didn't have to keep making this piece over and over and over again. But these will mount on the end like that. And then of course the sides will go on. And I'm going to be doing something a little different with the car ends this time. I'm going to do the same with my diaphragms on my passenger car. I'm going to have these held on with magnets. There'll be 2 on by the doorways. There'll be 2 on the ends, maybe a couple more in the middle somewhere. But that way, if you ever want to work on the bottom end of the car, instead of reaching down through, you'll be able to pull the sides off the car. And the magnets should hold it. It'll be a grand experiment to see if it works. But do I have those 3D printed parts handy here? I probably don't. They probably got put away somewhere. Yeah. Anyway, you guys get a good idea of what's going on here with that. So.
David, are your roofs held on with magnets too, or are they just pressed?
You know, they aren't now. They're just kind of press fit on there. But I think in the future, I'm going to use magnets on those also, because eventually I want to put lights in here, and I just haven't really decided how I'm going to do it. Now with these new LEDs, you can buy strips of LEDs, and I think I'm going to go with that. And then I will put magnets in, like 6 magnets on here, rare earth magnets. And that way I can maybe even remove this ledge and just have the roof sit right on there and snap in place. And I think that'll be a fantastic idea. But right now they're just basically set on there. They leave a little bit of a gap in here, but like I say, when I finally put the lights in and get it, I'll maybe put the magnets in there, and then the roofs will just snap right on.
What glue do you use to attach the paper flooring to the plastic structure?
The way I do the flooring is the paper, of course, is pretty porous. So what I will do is I will spray it with either dull coat or gloss coat, whichever way you want. If you want shiny floors, spray with gloss coat, but I'll spray both sides. And then what I do is I will take this contact cement, which is used for countertops. It's used for tile floors, all that kind of stuff. And what I will do is put some in these little containers that I keep from the cinnamon rolls that my wife and I love to buy. The icing comes in these. So I'll put a bunch in there, and then I will mix MEK or acetone in there to really loosen it up, make it like watery paint. And I'll take a brush and I'll paint a layer on the car itself, or wherever you want to put the flooring. And then with it coated with the dull coat or the gloss coat, you can paint that glue on the paper. You let the two dry and you set the paper in place and press down. But it won't be very thick. And that's the beauty about watering this stuff down. Instead of a real heavy glue, it's a very thin layer of glue. And you put it down on there and you press it. And that's how I held these pieces in place, the foil. That's just using some of the old contact cement and then just pressing them down in place. And it works very well for holding that kind of stuff. But the paper flooring is all held in place with this kind of stuff. Goo is the same thing, but you'd have to use a lot of it. And goo tends to get real thick. But once again, you put acetone in there and stir it up and it loosens it right up. And that's how I do the flooring on those cars.
What about using the different 3M transfer tapes? You'd have to read the specs to get the right one, but
yeah, I've never tried that. There's probably better ideas than what I'm doing. This is what I've done. I'd be interested in knowing if other people have different techniques, because this might not be the best technique. It's the one I find works, but I've learned so much watching these Zoom meetings. Martin's little trick of mixing goo and super glue together, I'm dying to try that on some wood kit sometime, because I've never thought of mixing the two glues. So I think that would be fantastic to try that out sometime.
I was only thinking about making it really thin.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's what I do with the flooring. So, I water that contact cement way down and then just use a regular little paintbrush to paint it on there, just like paint. And it ends up being very thin. And then once the two are dry, or dry to the touch, basically, you put the two together and rub it down on there, and it's there to stay. It's pretty amazing. And then one other thing that I built, and this was another challenge, was a friend of mine had pictures of a giant boom that went up onto the iron range. And this was built off photographs. I just looked at the pictures and I started cutting things saying, yeah, that looks about right. Yeah, that looks about right. And I built this. I had it originally on a flat car, but we had to remove it off the flat car. The car got damaged. But anyway, this was shipped to Duluth on a 50-foot flat, and the boom is like 75 feet. So they had to have two idler flats on either side of it. It's not particularly heavy. It was just a 70-ton flat, and this sat on that flat car. So obviously it didn't weigh more than 70 tons. But this was one of those challenges. He challenged me to build it, and I thought, all right, sucker, you're on. I'll do it. But I made these two wheels on the end here on my lathe. I glued plastic together, once again laminating it with super glue, and then I mounted it to my lathe, and I turned those out, and then I cut these little angles out of there, the little cutouts in there, and it took two wheels to do it. But anyway, this was just one of those challenges that the guy challenged me to make, and so I whipped it out. Now he's challenged me to make the bucket that goes along with this. And he sent me a whole bunch of photographs the other night, and I said, I've got enough to do right now. And then one other little scratch built thing is I'm building a 44-tonner. And once again, I started this back when I didn't have any money, because I always said I had lots of time, I had very little money. Now it's reversed. Now I don't have as much time anymore. I'm getting older and I've got money, but I still enjoy scratch building. And this is just simply laminated plastic, many sheets of plastic glued together, super glued together. And so it's very stable. And then I made the cab, and I made a frame, and I laminated sheets of lead in the frame here. So it's got a little bit of heft to it, but I got to put in the front grills but it should be a fun kit when it's done. And I retire in September. So I think magic's going to start happening here after September.
Now, the 45-tonner, is that the one that had the side rods on it?
No, it's a 44-tonner. Sorry if I said 45. The Northern Pacific, and everything's Northern Pacific in my world. The Northern Pacific used a 44 tonner in Duluth to switch out the passenger trains. And the reason went with 44 ton engine had a contract that said if the locomotive weighs more than 45 tons or more, it has to have an engineer and a fireman. So the NP ordered a 44 ton locomotive and then argued with the union saying you only need an engineer, don't need a fireman now because the engine doesn't weigh 45 tons. And it was a huge court battle. And eventually the NP won because it was like, well, you guys agreed that if it was 45 or more, you have to have a fireman. This engine does not weigh 45 tons. It weighs 44 tons. So that's the story behind that locomotive. So I thought, well, that'll be kind of fun to build that. So that's going to be an NP. And then I found out later on that it was I think it was number 5. And it ended up going to the Midland Continental Railroad, which Bob Chellan is a big fan of. And they had that locomotive for years. It ended up going to Kansas City. And then from there, I think it got scrapped, which is unfortunate. It'd been kind of fun if that could have been at the Duluth Museum, but you know, you can't save it all. So I guess that's the quick rundown on my passenger train and scratch building techniques. Anybody got any more questions or?
What kind of drive for that 44 tonner?
I've got Q Car Company made some trucks, and I'm gonna see if I can work on that. But otherwise, I will probably go with the Magic Carpets or the I think Northwest Shortline, the new outfit they've got. What do they call those new the new drives they have? Stanton drive, something like that. I'm going to go with that. That way I don't have to cut holes in the floor. The drives will actually be in the truck. So I will probably use, I've got the Q Car Company side frames, which are good for the GE. And then I will probably outfit them with Magic Carpets or something in that fashion. So is anything anybody wants to see up close or want a better look at? Or
I'll be honest with you, I could sit by your side in your workshop all day and just and just watch you build this stuff. This is a real education, just seeing the way that you approach the art of scratch building.
Here's another little interesting project I built. This was another kit bash type of thing. AHM years ago, back in the 70s, made little 40-foot flat cars. So I took 2 of them. I cut one at the 2/3 mark and I cut another one at the 2/3 mark, and I put the 2 halves together to make a 50-foot car. Now this car is probably 30 years old, and I had an affinity for the Chicago Great Western, so I just lettered it CGW, and then I think I just picked a number. Now I'd pay a little more attention to the detail, making sure the car's a little more accurate, but back then I didn't care. Well, the local hardware store in town had these little Ertl tractors, and these are the 300s. Well, I decided I would put them on the flat car, but the problem was when they didn't have a cultivator on them, they put them nose to nose, so they could put about 6 or 8 tractors on one flat car. So I thought, okay, well then I'm going to mount the cultivators on them so that I can only have 3 on here. So I scratch built the cultivators out of wire and just brass shapes. I look at it now and I think I must have been out of my mind to do stuff like this. But anyway, I sat down in the basement with my soldering iron, a bending plier, and just bent them around and put them together. And then originally I had used chain to chain them down on the flat car. Well, I had a good friend that I worked with who said, we never used chain. I worked for IH. He said, we use 3-stranded cable because chains disappear. People would steal them. So he said, we used to buy reel after reel after reel of this 3-stranded cable. We'd let the air out of the tires, wrap the cable around, tighten it up with a bar, and then we'd refill the tires with air. And he said, you could play fiddle notes on those wires. They were strapped down so tight on the flat car. So took all the chains off and put the wires on there. But that was a fun little project with those little Ertl tractors. The other problem I had, the hardware store only had 3. So I couldn't get 8 of them. Now, of course, with eBay, you can get all you want. But back then you had, everything was bought locally. There was no eBay. So, but I thought that was a fun project. I took that to Chicago and they had so many people staring at it that they had to put a chair by it because people were just studying the tractors themselves. And I used to work on a farm, so I knew how the cultivators used to work. And they were getting a kick out of that. So they put chairs by it so people could sit and actually study them. So yeah, not as much as I can think about as far as the scratch building goes. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I do that somebody might be interested in, but I think that's about it for now. I certainly, when I retire, I'd be happy to do this again, but that's going to be up to you, Jim.
Absolutely. Anytime that you're available, I welcome you back. I mean, you are
okay,
a true,
that's great.
You and your son both are true craftsmen. I mean, I'm proud to have you and honored that you want to be back. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we're going to start building a layout in this room. I got a 14 by 21 room here, and we're going to start building a layout in here probably this summer. So maybe by next fall, I'll have something up and ready to go here. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And I certainly want you back. So I'll count on it sometime this fall.
Okay, that sounds good.
Both you and your son.
All right, sounds good. Thank you much.
Thank you. All right, so I want to make one announcement before we go, and that's about our build-alongs. You've heard Greg Cassidy and Chris talk about the one tonight that they're doing. Bob Farquhar is doing one with Dale Rush of Blairline Structure, and I hope that you'll start getting ready for that one. Because that comes up 17th of April. Bob is going to start that. Gaylord Gill and Randy Bostner are building the Bar Mills 1 kit, also starting on April the 17th. May the 22nd, Rick and Maureen Hunter are going to build their 30-foot King Truss Bridge. Clark Cooning, starting March the 27th, is going to start building the downtown deco model. Bill Davis is going to do a rail scale model from Steve Milley starting in August. And I'll start talking about that more probably in June or the July timeframe. But Steve is giving a significant discount on that model, as are Bar Mills, as is Blairline. And the one that Hunter Line has is significantly less. And also the one that Clark is doing, Downtown Deco. In effect, that's going to be a 2-for-1 kit with all of the additional signage and additional walls that are being provided by the manufacturer. So I hope that you'll think about joining in and building along with the various modelers and the companies that are participating. We're really looking forward to it and thank everybody for participating. I am still looking for more O-scale modelers. I am still looking for more N-scale modelers. Bill Davis is going to build his in O-scale, but I need more O-scalers, and I also need N-scalers. I don't have any N-scalers yet. So if you're interested, please let me know. Our next Zoom meeting was supposed to be with Warren Judd. Warren sent me an email today, and he's going to have to cancel. And I've got him rescheduled for later this year. And Andy Kinney is going to take his place and talk about his turnout control that he uses. So I'm looking forward to that, and I really appreciate Andy stepping up to fill in that slot. Also, Ted Becker is going to do his segment on tools. Dave Silvernail is going to do scenic elements. Gaylord again is going to do one of his build along segments. Bob Farquhar does his 15 minutes on structure building techniques. And Rick and Maureen Hunter are going to do another segment on weathering. So it's going to be a full time again. It's going to be interesting. I hope that you can join us. Thank you so much for coming this evening. I hope that you learned something, and I hope you had an enjoyable evening. Thank you so much.